Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 23rd of July, 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today, Patrick Kenningson from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be back with you, Mike.
Well, let's get straight on with the heroes of the hour, continuing to be the White Helmets. Well, it's a bit unfortunate, Patrick, that, what has happened? The Syrian government making too much, the Syrian army making too much progress in the southern part of Syria. We've had to see a significant number of white helmets being some kind of emergency evacuation, I suppose is what you say. Well, let's have a look and see what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say, because these people have come out through Israel. He said that Donald Trump had been in touch asking for help in getting these people moved out of southern Syria. These are the people who are saving so many hundreds of thousands of lives. And so Mr. Netanyahu approved their passage through Israel. And currently they're in the hands of the UNHCR. We'll come on to that in a second. Now, there's lots of stuff in the mainstream media about this today and yesterday. But Vanessa Beeley was speaking to some people earlier on about this. She said that she'd just done an interview on Al Mayadeen, and this is what she learned from the other guests in Damascus and Jordan about the White Helmet exodus from southern Syria. Out of the alleged 800 white helmets who were given exceptional assistance by Israel, only 442 have actually arrived in the camps in Jordan. According to intelligence on the ground, reality is that more than 3,000 exceptional refugees have actually transitioned into Israel. And she's asking, does this mean that more than 2,500 were possibly Israeli affiliates and proxies who have been repatriated to Israel, EU special forces who will return home from Israel, or Gulf state intelligence military entities who will also return home from Israel without needing to transfer to Jordan? That's a good question. She says that nationalities involved are said to be UAE, Qatar and Saudi. Most were not Syrian. Also these exceptional refugees would not accept amnesty and be evacuated to the north, as this would mean that they would have to undergo inspection of their equipment and nationality, which would expose the regime change coalition states who were controlling them. And she's saying that of the 442 who have arrived in Jordan, Germany is committed to taking 50. Canada has suggested that it will take 250. So how many will come to France and the UK? And she's saying that the guests on the programme with her were Dr. Turki Hassan from Damascus and Dr. Hayat Ataya from Jordan. So that's what Vanessa has discovered is the latest information on this. Now, as Moon of Alabama was pointing out today, because lots of the commentary that's running around the Twitter sphere and the mainstream media is that these people were brought to Israel. But Moon of Alabama here making the point, of course, that it was the United Nations that managed the evacuation, not Israel. And that's indeed what Netanyahu said. He had authorized for them to be transferred through Israel. Then yesterday, of course, there was this joint statement from Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt, the new Foreign Secretary of State. The statement, well, just read the statement in total, because it's worth reading the whole thing. It says, following a joint diplomatic effort by the UK and international partners, a group of White Helmet volunteers from southern Syria and their families have been able to leave Syria for safety. They are now being assisted by the UNHCR in Jordan pending international resettlement. The White Helmets, she said, have saved over 115,000 lives during the Syrian conflict at great risk to their own. Many White Helmet volunteers have also been killed while doing their work, trying to rescue civilians trapped in bombarded buildings or providing first aid to injured civilians. White Helmets have been the target of attacks, and due to their high profile, we judged that in these particular circumstances, the volunteers required immediate protection. We therefore took steps with the aim of affording that protection to as many of the volunteers and their families as possible. We pay tribute to the brave and selfless work that the White Helmets volunteers have done to save Syrians on all sides of the conflict. Well, that's very interesting. That's what the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development had to say on this. Peter Ford, the former ambassador to Syria for the United Kingdom, had a slightly different take on this. So he made some comments on that statement from Penny Mordaunt and Jeremy Hunt. And he said the government statement issued on the 22nd of July below contains two blatant lies. The White Helmets most definitely have not assisted all sides of the conflict. From their founding in Turkey in 2013 by James Le Mesurier, a former employee of MI5, they have only ever operated in rebel-held areas. Syrian government-controlled areas have the Real Syrian Civil Defense and Syrian Red Crescent. The White Helmets' appropriation of the title Syrian Civil Defense is typical of the misleading cloud of disinformation surrounding this media-savvy, pampered organisation. Secondly, the White Helmets are not volunteers. However, often this misleading term is applied to them. They are doing jobs for which they're paid by Western governments. That's the UK, the US, Canada, Germany, Netherlands and New Zealand. They received £38 million from the UK up to March 2018. They have a press department 150 strong, bigger than that for the whole of the UK ambulance service. Their claims of saving over 115,000 lives have never been verified. The co-location of their offices with jihadi operation centres, on the other hand, has been well documented. Apparently the government are lying because they're nervous of being accused of importing into this country scores of dangerous migrants who have many times been reported to be associating with extremists. The government transparently needs to whitewash them. The White Helmets' dramatic exfiltration leaves many questions unanswered. Why was it deemed necessary to evacuate this particular group in the south when other groups of White Helmets simply got on the buses to northern Syria when military operations concluded in Aleppo, eastern Ghouta and elsewhere, and when similar exodus by bus has been arranged for rebels in Daraa? Why should White Helmets be considered to be more at risk than combatants, many of whom have either reconciled or been bussed out? In the demonology of the government side, the White Helmets are not seen as worse than other jihadis. Might the British government have been afraid of this particular group being caught and interrogated, revealing perhaps the truth about alleged chemical weapons incidents? Will they now be foisted onto poorer areas of the UK already struggling to absorb migrants, or will they go to places like Esher and Carshalton? Will local councils be informed about the backgrounds of these fugitives? Will local councils be given extra resources to absorb them and cope with resulting security needs, bearing in mind that Raed Saleh, the leader of the White Helmets, was refused a visa to the US in 2016. So those are Peter Ford's comments and questions, and I think that covers it all very nicely.
It does. So we've identified, Mike, 4 lies told by Penny Mordaunt in that joint statement with Jeremy Hunt. 1, they are not volunteers, the White Helmets. That's a fact. They're paid. In fact, if you look at what they're paid, although it might seem a pittance to the average Briton or European at $150 or $200 a month, bear in mind a Syrian army soldier will make around $50 a month. You can go ahead and check those figures if you'd like. If you want to look at the average national salary for a Syrian professional of a medium grade, or a teacher, or a college lecturer, you're going to find it's right around the same exact level as what the White Helmet volunteers are being paid. That's the first lie. The second lie is that they are helping civilians on all sides of the conflict. That's patently false. The White Helmets only operate in terrorist-held areas exclusively, and of their membership happen to fall into one exclusive demographic, which is male, Sunni, and it seems Salafist, so more on the sort of extremist or Islamist side. 100% Sunni, male, Muslim, and leaning, I would say, more than average on the Salafist side. The third lie is that they have saved 115,000 lives. Now, I can't prove that they haven't, but they can't prove that they have. There is not one single bit of documentation. We have not seen one single interview. Imagine, Mike, the hours of films produced by this group in their film production roadshow. Not one interview of a survivor, someone who's been rescued by the White Helmets. Not one. Not one, Mike. And so they've saved 115,000 lives. If you do the math, They were founded and became active in late 2013. That's a pretty heavy daily clip of saving lives. You can go ahead and do the math at home or in the UK column chat box. Please let us know how many per day that would have been up until when they were active a few months ago. So they have no documentation, no accident reports, no reports whatsoever, names, residencies, addresses, dates, places, geolocating coordinates of when and where these lives were saved, Mike.
Well, that's very strange.
There's no data at all.
That's a very strange thing, Patrick, because apparently they send quarterly financial reports to the Foreign Office, but yet they don't have this type of data. That's
for a first responder organization, Mike. That would be the first thing I would be looking for in terms of, say, auditing. Am I getting my money's worth by plowing, collectively between the U.S., Britain, the Dutch government, the German government, the Japanese government, the New Zealand government, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking upwards of $250 million. Okay, thus far, plus all the crowdfunding money that's been poured into them and Mayday Rescue. Can we see a list or some sort of evidence? Is it maybe, I don't know, if you're listening now, the White Helmets, it's not too late to fabricate some evidence. Just put something together, make some interviews happen, do something of these 115,000 lives that you've saved. Supposedly. So you'd think that a government minister would want to be able to back a statement like that. But the fourth lie, Mike, here's the fourth lie. The fourth lie is actually underpinning this whole narrative we're seeing this week. What is the fourth lie? That the White Helmets are targets of attacks. Who is targeting the White Helmets? When and where were they singled out or targeted? Or is this just something that's come out of their PR oracle? Like everything else that's come out of the White Helmets 150-person strong public relations and media unit, as you pointed out, Mike. So major organizations, international organizations, don't have that sort of manpower for public relations, marketing, and media communication. So maybe they could tell us and provide some evidence as to how this group has been targeted. Here's the bottom line, Mike. This group could have easily gotten the bus to Idlib and walked across the border to Turkey. In fact, their base is in Turkey, not Syria. It's in Gaziantep. And that's where some of the filming is sometimes done as well of their training, and who knows what other filming is done in Turkey. So they have a base of operations there. Why couldn't have they gone there? And so is this not a cover story? How many White Helmets were actually in this? Is this a cover story for a bigger operation, which Vanessa Beeley has alluded to there, the repatriation of hundreds, in fact, maybe thousands of foreign fighters working at least under the partial military supervision or coordinating with the Israeli military, who is active on that southern front, as is the U.S. military and other NATO member states. So is that not what we're looking at? Because, Mike, in fact, many of the Syrian rebels have already surrendered or already negotiated terms of surrender or have gone through the reconciliation process. Why would the so-called first responders or search and rescue members of this great, wonderful organization, why would they not be afforded equal rights or ability to go through the same processes that armed militants have gone through, unless they themselves are not White Helmets, unless they themselves are foreign fighters, in fact, and this is a cover for a much bigger exodus or movement of foreign fighters across borders and then scatter them out into other countries. So, Mike, there's a lot to unpack here, and it seems to me like what is being advertised in the mainstream media is a fantastic bit of PR cover for something else that's actually happening.
So we have a figure of 550 a week over that 4 or 5 year period.
So they've saved 550 lives a week. Have the Syrian army actually flown that many air sorties, Mike?
Not that I'm aware of.
That's quite an interesting statistic.
Well, look, we'll come on to a bit more of this in a second. Before we leave Syria, I just wanted to go back to this article from May in RT. The headline was, at that time, Syria recognizes South Ossetia establishes diplomatic link. And they were saying Syria has recognized the independence of South Ossetia, which broke away from Georgia after a brief war in 2008. The two states have exchanged embassies, while Georgia announced it was cutting ties with Syria. The Syrian Arab Republic and the Republic of South Ossetia declare their mutual recognition, and the establishment of diplomatic relations at embassy level is what they said at the time. Well, today, or in fact, sorry, it was yesterday, no, it must be today, this morning, the Syrian Deputy Prime Minister, Walid al-Mualem, and the South Ossetian Foreign Minister have signed a document establishing formally those diplomatic relations between the two countries. So Syria has become one of the few countries to recognize the independence of South Ossetia. I was wondering what you thought about that.
This is what I think I'm reading from this story, Mike, is this is Syria's first foray into, say, international relations in terms of exerting its international relations in a diplomatic way in recognizing South Ossetia. But it goes a little bit more than that, Mike. If you look at the situation in Syria, what has happened to that country over the last 7 years. Some of the foreign fighters, the so-called moderate rebels, who are being armed, by the way, we'll remind again, being armed and backed and supported by NATO member states, including Britain, including the US, including France, and many others, including Turkey over the years too. And Jordan has also hosted these foreign fighters. Some of them are coming from Dagestan, Chechnya, Abkhazia, Georgia, okay? So South Ossetia could also be a transit area for these foreign fighters, or they could, some of them be coming from areas like this. So in terms of Syria, Mike, this is in their national security interest. This is directly within their national security purview. So if you look at it in that respect, Mike, I would say that this is definitely Syria now taking a proactive move outside of its borders now that it's regaining some control over previous areas of tension, escalation in their country. So really significant.
Well, one of the big issues that has been repeated ad nauseum in the mainstream press in the UK has been the issue of civilian casualties and how Assad and the Russian backers are bombing various parts of Syria and killing all kinds of civilians. Well, Air Wars has published this report today. Death in the city, high levels of civilian harm in modern urban warfare resulting from significant explosive weapons use. And they're not looking at what the Syrians and the Russians are doing. They're looking at what the US and the so-called coalition forces are doing, including the United Kingdom. And what they're saying is that the US-led coalition killed as many as 9,600 civilians in the battle against ISIS. Well, let's get this quote from it. Civilian casualties from US-led strikes appear to be at their highest levels since Vietnam, and yet there's little or no official effort made to track the overall death toll from urban fighting. They're saying that heavy use of explosive weapons, well, they're saying unintentionally inflicted large numbers of casualties. I'm sorry, I can't accept that because, you know, any military planner understands the significance of using a particular type of weapon, particularly when they know very well that ISIS tends to use human shields. So they know what the consequences of this. They're saying that the figures that they gathered are 10 times higher than the figures given by the coalition, the official figures. This is leading them to describe recent operations by the coalition as the least transparent military campaign in US history. So they're saying that there are a couple of examples. They're saying that in Mosul, in Iraq, in March 17th, 2017, coalition airstrike on homes in the Jadida neighborhood saw 105 civilian casualties. A 500-pound delayed fuse munition was dropped on a building in an attempt to target ISIS snipers on the rooftop, but families had been hiding in lower levels. So they say the battle for Iraq's second city was described by American officials as the most intense urban fighting involving their forces since World War II. The civilian toll, meanwhile, grew at levels not seen in decades, reported non-combatant casualty rates from Western military actions in both Mosul and Raqqa reached levels last seen in Korea or Vietnam. So the next time we see a headline from the mainstream media in the West criticizing what Russia and Syria is doing, when in fact they have been significantly better at containing these types of casualties than the US and the UK have, then we need to bring out this report and ask them why they aren't asking more questions of us in the West.
Yeah, and also let's point out, Mike, go back to that slide just quickly if we can. Notice, it's important to notice the operations with regards to Raqqa and Mosul are you cannot separate those. They are totally married and intertwined with the U.S. domestic political agenda in terms of the timing, in terms of the schedule of when those operations had to happen, when the U.S. government needed a win against ISIS, whether that was a win that was required by Barack Obama to bolster the electoral chances of the Hillary Clinton campaign, or by Donald Trump to claim a victory in the spring of 2017, or later than that as well. And so what I'm saying here is that there's little care for the lives on the ground. What's important in the U.S. is how is this going to play in the domestic political agenda. And so that level of carelessness, that level of moral hazard is I think what this report should be taking. The next step of this report is to look at that. So why would the U.S. be so careless? It's because they're rushing. It's because they have a schedule to keep. It's because that basically takes precedent over the value of the lives on the ground. Because as we learned from reading Tim Ripley's excellent book called Operation Aleppo, the time and the care and the precision taken by the Syrian and Russian militaries to retake East Aleppo was meticulous and was, I would even go so far as to call it scientific and very restrained, Mike. And it was a long operation. It took a long time. And it cost them a lot of men on the ground as well. So the U.S. sacrificed nothing on the ground. In fact, they undermined the forces on the ground, Iraqi forces, namely the Hashd al-Shaabi. They undermined them at every turn in their sort of battle against ISIS, the U.S. did. So lack of cooperation with real Iraqi military forces on the ground, but they didn't support them because they claimed that they were backed by Iran. So then that's the U.S., again, the domestic political agenda playing into everything that they do militarily. So everywhere you turn, Mike, they just put their foot wrong at every instance. Talking about the United States and its allies in both Iraq and Syria.
Okay, let's come back to the UK then. And, well, piece of good news here because Charlie Rowley has apparently been released from hospital. He has recovered very quickly. His brother says he's extremely surprised at the speed of the response. Charlie Rowley, by the way, one of the two people who were allegedly poisoned by Novichok in Amesbury a few weeks ago. So he spent 20 days in intensive care battling the Novichok. And he's now apparently under police guard at a secret location. And according to this Sky News article here, he's said to be feeling extremely bored. Now, as I say, Charlie Rowley's brother, very surprised by the quick recovery. Unfortunately, Dawn Sturgis, his partner, died from this. And the concern was, well, how did these two obtain this contamination in the first place? Well, the story seems to be changing slightly because in the Sky News article here, it says that Mr. Rowley said his brother's recollection of what happened was very vague, but he said he definitely said to me that they found this bottle of something and Dawn sprayed it on her wrists and that he picked it up and broke it somehow, and that's how he got it on his hands. So this is the first time I've heard about the bottle of perfume being broken.
I thought it was a cigarette butt on the side of
No,
the road.
no.
That was the first. That was the first version.
For a couple of weeks now, it's
official
been
story.
It's
Okay.
been
Now it's
a perfume bottle.
A perfume bottle.
And apparently they found it near where the Skripals had been found, and that she had decided that she would spray it on her wrists.
And it had been sitting there for 3 months.
And it had been
right?
sitting there for 3 months.
So they combed Salisbury with hazmat suits, and nobody found a perfume bottle full of Novichok.
That's right.
That's interesting.
That's right. And so there is new advice from Public Health England, who've produced this leaflet. And the new advice is, if you didn't drop it, don't pick it up. So this is the new advice. If you're in Wiltshire or anywhere near Salisbury, you've got to be very careful. If you see any litter on the ground, do not pick it up, because it literally could be deadly.
Yeah. Especially you young males who are out on the lash on Friday night. If you see a bottle of Calvin Klein cologne on the ground on the side of the road, whatever you do, don't pick it up.
Don't.
If you see something, say something. Call it in to.
Well, run, hide, and tell is the absolutely,
okay.
Absolutely. So don't pick it up. That's
Port,
the advice.
Portendown doesn't have an
I am
800 line.
very happy to act as a public service here to offer this advice, well, Public Health England should be very pleased with themselves for producing this spectacular leaflet.
It's very good of them to do that.
Yes. Now let's get on to something which is potentially equally nuts, because here we've got Amazon. Amazon apparently is now issuing warnings about Brexit, that a no deal in Brexit risks civil unrest. Patrick?
Well, this is interesting. I saw this on the front page of the, surprise, it was on the front page of the Times. So I was looking at the Deep State Times on the newsstand this morning, and I see this story. And so I read it. I'm looking for something of substance in there. So I kept reading, and yet more reading, and yet nothing emerges of substance. So the CIA apparently have weighed in via Amazon here. And so this is just absolute propaganda, Mike. What does a company that delivers electronics devices to your door and trinkets, what do they know about civil unrest and Brexit? Well, apparently very little. So this was a talking point given by the UK head of Amazon to Dominic Raab, who is the new czar of Brexit, I'm told.
Yes.
So this is important information that he needed to have to make an informed decision. I mean, does this belong on the front page of a major daily newspaper, Mike? That's the question.
The Times has had a few strange front pages recently.
So you have to ask yourself, is it newsworthy or is it propaganda? What's the point of the headline? Is the headline to stir up confusion and to scare people, and maybe, in a sense, creating psychological unrest across the country? Is that not the purpose of a headline like this? But when I read this, The Guardian, other people parroted this, did the mimeograph, mainstream mimeograph on this, and nobody really challenges it as a ridiculous claim. They just report it as news. So I think that's the problem, Mike.
Yeah.
That's the big problem.
Indeed. Okay, let's get a bit more serious for a second. Now, these two these so-called captured Britons, people from the UK who had been fighting for Islamic State, nicknamed the Beatles, and that's Alexander Coty on the left and Al Shafi El-Sheikh on the right. They're said to have been members of this, what's being described as brutal four-man Beatles cell of Islamic State executioners, who, we've seen the videos, Jihadi John and so on. These guys were related to that, and apparently they're responsible for killing a series of people from Western countries who were over in Syria and Iraq. Now, the understanding is that they've been stripped of their British citizenship. They were captured in January this year, and the US wants them to be sent over to the United States for trial. And this was the key point here, because apparently in a leaked letter, which was published by The Telegraph over the weekend, Sajid Javid, the new Home Secretary, sorry, that's mislabeled as Community Secretary. It's an old slide, but anyway, he has apparently said in this letter, yes, please go right ahead and execute them. Now, some people have expressed support for this policy. Here's David Jones, one of the big Brexit campaigners on Twitter saying UK drops death penalty in Guantanamo opposition and opens door to execution of Beatles jihadists in US. Common sense at last. It's just a shame we need to rely on the USA to deliver the death penalty to terrorists instead of doing it ourselves. Now, there's a number of points to make here. First of all, the mother of one of the victims of these people was on the Radio 4 Today programme saying that, that's Diane Foley, saying that absolutely she was opposed to the use of the death penalty in this case. She said, I'm very against that. I think it would make them martyrs in their twisted ideology. I would like them held accountable by being sent to prison for the rest of their lives. And that's a very good point. But the key point here is that a lot of people now are conflating their personal view on what should happen to people or what should happen under certain circumstances like Brexit with the constitutional protections that we are entitled to. And the fact of the matter is that there's a constitutional protection in place, which is that any time a country wants to extradite a British citizen to that country where there's a potential of a death penalty being imposed, Britain will not extradite that person under those circumstances without assurances from that country that the death penalty will not be imposed, right? And in this case, that has been set aside. Now, what we're looking at, therefore, is Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, taking a unilateral decision, because there's some speculation today in the mainstream press about whether Theresa May was involved in this decision. It's not known. Sajid Javid has taken a unilateral decision that in this case, these guys can be sent over, and he'll write a letter to Jeff Sessions or whoever it is saying, don't worry, if you want to impose the death penalty, just go right ahead. Now, there's an issue for me there because if he's prepared to make that decision in this case, where there may be quite a bit of sympathy that these people should be subject to the death penalty, the point is that there is therefore no protection for somebody that's being sent over for, saying, hacking a Department of Justice computer or something like that, or something significantly less serious.
Or publishing troves of documents online on their website. The current U.S. president, before he was president, I believe made a what could be classed as a throwaway remark in 2010. This is Donald Trump we're talking about, that maybe Julian Assange should get the death penalty. So this would pertain to Julian Assange too, this case, Mike. So this is important. Now, someone might seem like in the football terraces, they might, those Muslims don't deserve to live, send them off and into the electric chair in Indiana or wherever, where Timothy McVeigh got his final charge. So that's going to be okay, no problem, that's fine. But you lose those rights for anyone, and that precedent is set across the board. The bigger question, Mike, is the Beatles. Did the security services know of them before they went gallivanting off to Syria to make videos? And are people aware that some of those videos were made in a green screen studio? That's not a conspiracy theory. That's already been proven. Is that not interesting part of the story? But to me, it's not surprising that they would want to liquidate these individuals, because rather than get answers to those previous two questions, it would be much easier to throw them to the wolves and let the public or whoever wants to get their pound of flesh, off with their heads or into Gitmo, whatever. I'm not excusing the crimes that they may have committed in Syria, which would be heinous. But this is a separate issue, Mike.
Exactly my point. Yes, absolutely.
And the people need to be able to separate these two issues in order to have some sane discourse on this topic.
And if we can't separate those two issues, then really we're heading down a slope which is pretty slippery very quickly. We're
regressing into medieval mentality, but that seems to be all the rage these days.
And yet it's that medieval mentality that people are criticizing Islamic jihadists of having. So it's a bit hypocritical, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you've put that absolutely perfectly, Mike.
Right, well, you were mentioning Julian Assange, so let's have another quick discussion.
Well, I always find it interesting to put these two people's faces next to each other. This is a tweet by Mark Curtis, the British author and journalist. He says, to the left, incarcerated, persecuted by a UK elite, including parts of the media, true. For being a journalist, it's true. And WikiLeaks is a publishing outlet, revealing secrets in the public interest, all true. But then to the right, there's this other character. He's free as well. Oh no, he's free, he's not incarcerated. Unlike Assange, he's free. He, having launched an illegal war, killing hundreds of thousands, protected by UK elite, and often appears in the media. What kind of system is this? Is the question Mark Curtis is posing there.
For our listeners, we should say that it's Tony Blair on the right.
Yes, that's Tony Blair on the right, and that's Assange on the left. So, yeah, you couldn't get a better contrast, Mike, than these two. And it says a lot about the system that we're living in today. And mind you, there's a lot of people who want Julian Assange on the so-called left, or the new left, or the pro-war left, or whatever we want to call it, the lost left. They want to see Julian Assange strung up for his role in publishing leaked emails during the 2016 U.S. election, even though those were all real emails, and they were in the public interest. Unfortunately, they were implicating one side of the election, and that is why these people want to see Julian Assange locked away or given the death penalty or whatever. So I've heard some shocking things, Mike, from people that would have previously supported Julian Assange. By the way, Mike, he could be handed over to the UK authorities today or tomorrow or anytime this week. There was information given to journalists of a fairly high profile that's been in the media that the Ecuadorian President Moreno would be handing over Julian Assange to UK authorities this week. In other words, that will be the next chapter in this drama. So see what happens. You might be talking about that tomorrow morning.
Possibly. Now, Donald Trump issuing threats to Iran. Now, this time via Twitter, once again, this time his entire tweet was all in capital letters. Do not threaten the United States or else, to paraphrase.
Yeah, people who do things in all caps, there's a sort of psychological workup on those people, right? That they're a little bit crazy. People who email and do things in all caps. So I try to save it for special occasions myself. But there's Trump, so the detente, peace-loving dove of the Trump, that's all sort of gone this week, and the warmongering Trump is back. But actually, in all fairness, Mike, it was only a tweet. It was only a few words in all caps. And let's face it, Mike, it's not the first time Donald Trump has made vociferous threats at other foreign nation states, including North Korea, and look how that ended up. They're all holding hands and skipping through the Rose Garden happily, looking for Easter eggs last month. So, but that's not shocking. What's shocking is this guy. This is Mike Pompeo, not to be confused with Pompey, General Pompey, who he thinks that he is, I really believe in his heart of hearts that he thinks he is the reincarnation of the avatar of the Roman general. So here he is. This is the Secretary of State. Mind you, Mike, this is the top U.S. diplomat. I use the word diplomat because that's the correct description of the title. So this is the top U.S. diplomat. The real is plummeting. A third of Iran's youth are unemployed. A third of Iranians live below the poverty line. But if you're a politically connected member of the regime in Iran's elite, the Iranian economy is doing great. So you brought up a good point here, Mike.
Well, I just couldn't believe he had tweeted that out, to be honest, because this is much more appropriate. The dollar is plummeting. A third of USA's youth is unemployed. A third of Americans live below the poverty line. But if you're a politically connected member of the regime's elite, the US economy is doing great. It's just staggering.
Isn't that something? You just line those up side by side, and it changes the whole story, doesn't it, Mike? So what Pompey is insinuating here is that we can't lift sanctions. In other words, the reason Iran's economy is struggling is because it's under heavy international U.S. sanctions and secondary sanctions. So If we lift sanctions, it's going to enrich the regime. That's the circular argument that is constantly deployed. That is the broken record that is always at #1 on the charts in Washington, D.C., that somehow if we lift sanctions, it will help this evil regime who don't share the money with all their poor people. The only solution, Mike, is to get rid of the regime. And again, this is it over and over again. So that's the genius argument that has never gone out of style in Washington, D.C. And as Mike just aptly pointed out there beautifully, he could easily be talking about the United States of America. If you want to talk about an oligarchy, I don't think you have to look much further than the USA.
No, absolutely. Well, we began with Israel, so let's end with Israel. Middle East Eye here, how Israel helped revive Europe's ugly ethnic nationalisms. Well, this is related to a lovely piece of legislation that Israel has just passed.
Well, this is interesting, isn't it? So Israel has more or less made it official. It has enshrined its apartheid state into law. So from here forward, Palestinians will be known as second-class citizens, but not only second-class citizens, non-citizens, second-class non-citizens. This is the permanent status of the native Arab Palestinian. I stress native Arab because they are the natives of that part of the world, unlike the Israeli settlers who invaded and took over the Arab territories in 1948-49, and many times after, have constantly encroached to get to the point where what we see today, Mike, is that the native Palestinian population has been pushed either out of the country or into smaller and smaller, more densely populated pockets, and then it's fish in a barrel, open season turkey shoot for the IDF. I'm not exaggerating there. That's what's actually been happening in the recent years, Mike. So this is kind of sad to see this legislation pass without any real international uproar, and does not say a lot about the international political climate we live in.
Well, indeed, and in fact, opposition leaders in this country being significantly attacked for alleged anti-Semitism because they don't want to remove the ability to criticize Israel's behavior with regard to the Palestinians in their political party's constitution. Absolutely spectacular. But we'll end on this tweet here from Jonathan Cook. U.S. white nationalist leader Richard Spencer's praise for Israel's nation-state law that prioritizes rights for Jewish citizens underscores the point of my recent article. Israel is an exemplar for ethnic nationalists seeking to revive racial ideologies.
That's a little bit of a simplistic narrative put forward by Mr. Spencer. Is ethnic nationalist. So no, I don't think that's correct. I think we're talking about colonialist settler nationalist, and in fact, to be more specific, white European nationalists, because there is a caste system in Jewish Israel where the white European castes are placed above all. And I think most Israelis will be able to tell you that as well. This is not a secret. But I think it's interesting that the white nationalist spokesperson, if you want to call him that, I know some people don't, but Richard Spencer certainly represents that faction widely, that he is defending Israel's apartheid state, basically. So a racially pure, race-based, religious-based exclusive state. So it's amazing, Mike, that something like this would pass, but people will be up in arms and losing their mind over Donald Trump's tweets, calling him a racist, calling him a this and that, and Israel is literally able to get away with turning back the clock hundreds of years right before your eyes. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for joining us today. That's all we've got time for. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. We will see you then, I hope. Have a good day. Bye-bye.